Ralph was wearing his armour and had been sweltering in the heat, so the rainstorm had been welcome. It had also muddied the slope up which the French would have to charge, making their approach treacherously slippery. There was nothing so terrifying as that charge. Called the Furor Franciscus, it was the ultimate weapon of the French nobility, and they had such enormous superiority in numbers that Ralph could not see how the English could hold them off indefinitely.
Each character has to have its own particular arc.
Yeah.
I mean, if a character doesn't grow in some way, or deteriorate, negative growth, then they're just static, and then they're just not as interesting. Because it's part of what you were saying about Ralph, actually. Yeah. There's some way in which he has to change and evolve as the book goes along, so that he comes to something. Unlike most of us who never change at all.
This little, rather scrubby little patch of land is where really the destinies of the two countries were determined.
For that period, yes, indeed, yeah.
And behind us?
There's a viewing platform where Edward stood in a windmill. That's where he directed the battle from.
And we're, as it were, walking through the very middle of his army.
Walking towards the Prince's division, yes, yeah. between the divisions.
So that we were surrounded by knights, horses...
Archers. Not so many horses. The horses would have been back with the baggage train. There were virtually no horses on the battlefield that day at all on the English side.
On the English side. Well, last time we had the discussion like this, we talked a lot about Ralph.
One of the things I had hoped that you would do, which you didn't quite do, was to make him very affectionate about somebody or something. And there is a moment or two when he seems affectionate about a horse, but that comes and goes very quickly. We never got an animal that he's devoted to, which I was sort of expecting. But I don't miss it necessarily.
If that side of his character exists, it's got to be shown somewhere.
Yeah, and I thought with an animal would be good.
Yeah, well, that would be convenient. Because the animal wouldn't be playing any kind of role in the story.
Well, I mean, yeah, he could, shower affection on an animal, and, there's no back talk. The animal's not going to get angry at him because he's cruel to somebody else.
So you've got, a couple of thousand, 2,000 or 3,000 horses coming up there.
2,000 or 3,000 horses charging up this hill here.
Yeah. I always say about going to race courses, you get maybe 20 or 30 horses and the ground does move as it comes past you, and the noise of that is quite much. And if you multiply that by a considerable number, you've got a hell of a lot of noise.
It must have felt like an earthquake. And then finally, they engaged.
We're looking to actually reissue Pillars of the Earth at the beginning of 2007 in a new cover look that would tie in then with how World Without End will look at the end of that year.
To make sure it's not in tiny print.
No,
and first of all, it's got a good enough binding that it's not going to fall apart when people open up 1,000 pages.
Sure.
The thing about Ken's readership, particularly with this book, is you're going to be covering the gamut of the ages.
Exactly.
Not only will it hit both a male and a female market. I think teenagers will read this book, as well as people in their 20s and as well as much older people. So I think with the different editions that we're planning, we should be able to cover all of that.
And at this point in the battle and in my book, there's a kind of key dramatic moment that when the Prince of Wales is threatened and Ralph is part of the rescue, part of saving the Prince of Wales, and I need that for my plot because I want Ralph to win some favour from the king in this battle.
Someone else straddled the fallen prince and swung a big sword, two-handed, at men and horses alike. Ralph saw that it was the prince's standard-bearer, Richard Fitzsimon, who had dropped the flag over his supine master. For a few moments, Richard and Ralph fought savagely to defend the king's son, not knowing if he was alive or dead.
Do you think that's reasonable?
Well, Richard Fitzsimon is unlikely to be the only person who was around the prince.
That's what I thought.
And the image that's portrayed is of him basically sort of straddling the prince to protect him from those around him. But I'm sure there would have been quite a number of other people.
And this is as far as we've got with our early thoughts, using the architectural drawings of the bridge. Possibly we need to do a bit more research and tying in the cathedral in the background. So,
well, this has a very classy look, which we're always looking for.
We're also quite desperate not to put off men, not to put off women, to appeal to everybody. Going back to the the spectrum of ages that we were talking about. Perhaps we'd like to introduce some gold in here, some filigree within the architectural detail. What do you think?
I think the sort of approach is the feel of it is quite good. I think it wants more impact, and you're talking about putting some gold in to give it more impact.
They couldn't have guessed, standing there on the 26th of August, that is the battle that was going to face them.
No.
I mean, you wouldn't.
They
It
were
wouldn't be your
yeah.
first thought of how things were going to go.
They were shrewd and they were brave, but most importantly, they were lucky.
Yeah, they were a bit lucky.
And that's probably what my character Ralph would have thought at the end of the day.
Yes.
Boy, we got away with it.
I mean, without the decorations you were talking about, it looks quiet. And
I suppose you think it might be a non-fiction book?
It's a
Yeah,
fine line between quiet and classy, isn't
Yes,
it?
there certainly is. Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's hitting it on the head that's tricky.
It has to be readable, which that isn't. I mean, one of the things you want in any cover is you want to sort of jump out at you. You want people to really not be able to miss it. And that cover is classy, but it's missable.